right, North Lake Youth, what's going on here? We're going to get started, but first I will pray. Dear Heavenly Father, Lord, I just thank you for today. I just thank you for the time you've given us to just be together and to hear your word and to just kind of let that sink in and marinate in our lives, Lord. I just pray that you would just anoint the words coming out of my mouth, help them be yours, help everybody just be willing and to listen and to hear and just to find those ways, Lord, to walk these things out in their lives. Just thank you for everything in Jesus' name, Amen. Okay, so in terms of what we're doing here, we're gonna have a few weeks of just kind of one-off sermons, nothing too spectacular, and they're not gonna be on like a series. We'll get into series a little bit later, so we don't need to worry about that. But we'll just have a couple of little loose ones to play with. And the first one here was kind of something that I've been thinking about recently for a few weeks or so, and I thought it's fairly important. Um, it's based off of Matthew 5:13 through 16. So if you're not there, you can go ahead and get that ready. And what we're going to talk about is influence a little bit. And let's go ahead and read through the verses, and then we'll have a good idea of what we're going to be talking about here. It says, "You are the salt of the earth, but if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house." So you probably have heard these verses a few times, and that's okay. But we're going to do things a slightly different way, I think. And so we were talking about influencers, and so if you're like me, or if you're like me when I was a kid, you probably were told, "Hey, don't hang out with this person or that person. They're a bad influence," or "Don't do this or that." And heck, it's probably been said about me, "Don't hang out with Austin. He's a bad influence." And 100% sure it's been said about JJ. So we definitely have heard these things, I think, and we know that like that's a thing we have to be aware of, right? That there's influences in our lives that come in and play a part. Um, nowadays, right, it's this whole industry of influencers. If we look at different types of social media, we see that there's influencers in all different things in all kinds of different categories. Um, and it just happens to be like a long laundry list. You can't see this list. This is a horrible screen behind me, so that doesn't help anything. But behind all that white screen, there's no way to do that. Oh, that's kind of there. Not so good. Um, and I think it's backwards. That doesn't help anything either. But behind me is a long laundry list of things that on social media you can see as influencers. We can go through this list and I'll just start reading some of them. I'm not going to read them all because it's a long list. But there's influencers for clothes and for accessories and for music and for cars and for sports and for nature and for food and for kids and for parenting and for luxury and nutrition and for home decor and for travel and for performing arts. There's actual marketing, real estate, acting, cooking, artwork, weddings, humanities, beauty bloggers, tourism, radio, comics, bodybuilding, dance, blah, blah, blah. It goes on forever. Yoga, CrossFit, parties, racing, fitness. I mean, the list goes on for a long, long time. And the whole point of it being is that these people, like, literally, it's a market. It's definitely a thing where people it's a job for them, right? And so, as we go into this, it's backwards again. How'd that happen? Crazy weird. Um, but as we go into this, we look at it and we think, okay, well, what are we supposed to do? Are we supposed to be staying away from these people? Or are we supposed to be trying not to be swayed? Um, but these people, I mean, that's their job. They're there to try to sway us one direction or another. And I could spend this whole entire time trying to tell you how to stay away and how to not be influenced by those people or from people in the world and how to stay away from bad company. But instead of doing that, I think this verse kind of calls us to look a little bit more inward instead of looking outward. So as we read through Matthew 5:13 through 16, we're going to kind of break it down. I'll read through it again, and then we're going to kind of break it down and go through a few sections here. So he starts out, he says, "You are the salt of the earth, but if salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and be trampled underfoot. If you are a light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on a stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. And then in the same way, verse 16, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven." So let's talk about saltiness a little bit. First off, I love salt. My blood pressure will confirm that statement. Probably shouldn't, but it is what it is. And I'm not talking about like salty, like like a crotchety old person, but just salty, right? A regular salt. Back when this was written, in that time, salt was kind of used for two main things. One, it was used to add flavor to things, and then two, it was used to preserve food. These are kind of the two main uses of salt, and still kind of is to this day. Obviously, we found a lot more uses for it, though. So Jesus calls us the salt of the earth, and he jumps right into this question of what happens when you're not salty anymore. But let's first go backwards and discuss what does it mean and what does it look like to be salty. That's a question that I think we need to address first before we get into what does it like to be not salty. So he says, "You are the salt of the earth." Salt tends to bring out different flavors and different food, right? If you put salt on different types of food, sometimes salt will bring out different flavors. It might make something spicier, it might make something sweeter, it might make something bring out the sour flavors. It's different for each different type of food, but salt enhances that flavor, it brings it out. And our lives do the same thing. We are all different. We've all gone through different things, and God has shaped us all in different ways, and we've been through different trials, and each of us has the ability to use our individual flavor, if you will, to spread the gospel to those around us. We each have this ability to influence those around us by being salt, by letting our lives speak into other people's lives, by letting our saltiness get onto them, by letting the things we've been through in our lives and our experiences and how God's worked in our lives be part of that and help bring out some of the flavors, if you will, of their lives to help show things that maybe were buried deep and bring them out into the surface. But we have this ability to do that. And that happens through us sharing our stories. When we let our saltiness of our stories and we let that saltiness enter into somebody else's lives, we get to see the gospel's flavor kind of experienced, and we get to see the gospel be experienced by somebody else in a little bit of a delicious way, right? Like it's something different that maybe they haven't seen or haven't experienced, and I think sometimes that happens. So that's part of it, right? What does it mean to be salt? I think it means for us to be able to be able to share the gospel and add some flavor and share that flavor of what God is and God is like and how he's worked in our lives. Second part is to preserve, right? We talked about salt being a preservative, and much like it sounds, Jesus is letting us know that we have a role to play in this world as Christians who believe in God and believe that Jesus died for us. We have this role and responsibility to be this preservative of the gospel and of what God's words are, and we need to be able to preserve those things. When someone wants to preserve food these days, like they will put salt on it, and that will help it from spoiling. If we don't do that, it starts out small. It starts with microorganisms getting to the food, then bacteria, and then mold starts to grow, and it just kind of gets bigger and bigger. And the same kind of thing can happen in a life and somebody's life where without this preservative, without God coming into their lives, and we can see it even in my own life. When I step away or I'm taking what I call a break, or I'm just being lazy and don't actively seek God, you'll see that things will start to occur. Maybe my attitude changes first, and then it just kind of snowballs from there. And I think it's the same way with anything else, probably with anyone else, right? If we don't have that preservative of Christ and Jesus and in our lives, then we don't have this ability to kind of withstand the pressures of the outside world. So I think it's important that we are these preservatives, this way for God's word and the gospel to be shared and to be preserved in our world right now. So Jesus asks, he says in the Sermon on the Mount here, he says, "What happens if we lose our saltiness?" And to be blunt, he kind of says, "Look, if you lose your saltiness, there's really nothing worth doing." He kind of goes back and says, "Look, your responsibility," and we go back to the Great Commission, which our church obviously very much is trying to follow, is going to make disciples. And if we can't share our lives and share our stories with others in a way that is meaningful, that spreads the gospel and is in a relational way, then what are we doing? And his point to that is kind of like, look, if you're not gonna to share, if you're not gonna spread the saltiness, if you're not gonna help preserve the gospel and the word that I've put here, then I don't know what it's worth. He's saying, he says it's worth basically being trampled underfoot. And that kind of hits home a little bit as far as like we have an active duty, right? Being a Christian isn't just a cool ride. It's not something that we kind of just do for fun, but it's an active duty. It's a participating duty. We have a calling. We have something that we've been asked to do. We need to do that, and it's just sometimes it takes us getting out of our comfort zone, around our family or around our friends. But at the end of the day, God's asked us to go out, and He's asked us to make disciples, and He's asked us to share our lives with others. And so that's what we need to do. If we go down to the next verse, it talks about the light of the world, right? It says, "As for the light of the world" part, and I think for the most part, I won't reread the whole thing, but we've all kind of heard this light of the world thing, maybe the whole hide it under a bushel, no, I'm gonna let it shine, whole deal. I won't sing that, so you're welcome for not singing that. But we probably heard it, and so this is kind of more of a good reminder, I think, for a lot of people, right? And I think that speaks for itself, just kind of getting the idea of light, right? Um, our job and our role isn't to just kind of hide ourselves away, but to be a light for the world, for them to see, so they can see, how we live, what God does in our lives, how we do things differently than others, to be an example of love, um, of trust and of faith, and all these things that go into, the difficult things of, maybe people don't understand of being Christian, that maybe seems hard or doesn't seem like maybe it's a vulnerable spot for them to get themselves into, but just to show that it's something that can be done, um, and how great it is at the end or when we're going through it. Um, this really, for me, just kind of reminds me of just to say, hey, look, we've we've looked at what it means to be salty and how to spread the gospel, and that we're supposed to be sharing our lives. Um, but what it really does is it takes me back to where this reminder of all the great things and all the good things God's done in my life, and how valuable they can be to somebody else if I'm willing to share it with them or not. If I'm not willing to share it, then it ends with me. If I am willing to share it, the work that God did in my life isn't really over, because I'm able to share that and hopefully move the work forward with in other people's lives, right? So it's important that we kind of remember that I don't think God works in our lives necessarily just only for us sometimes, right? I think sometimes it's meant for everybody. It's meant for a lot of other people down the line, and it's not for us to know that, but it is for us to be able to share it. It's good for us to share with people how He saved us, how He's protected us, how He's comforted us, how He's changed us, how He's strengthened us, and always how He loves us. And I think it's important for people to know that right now, especially. Um, God has given us our lives to help Him be the biggest influencer in the world, and so we need to be able to do that, and it takes a lot of dedication, obviously, a lot of guts, sometimes to just put yourself out there, but it's something we should be looking at and trying to do, right? whether it's with our friends, whether it's with our families, whether it's just random strangers. It just happens to fit right? But it's something that I think we should all be looking for those opportunities to be sharing our lives with others. Help the greatest influencer in the world. All right. So with that being said, there's a couple of questions. You probably won't be able to see them now that I just realized this whole thing is white. So that's cool. Maybe I can do, let's try this. Maybe I turn the light and go dark. That made it worse. What? How is that even possible? Okay, well, I'll read them to you since this room's a nightmare. That's crazy. Cool, man. Cool. All right, the first question is this. You might want to write this down if you're not, because you won't be able to pause the video and see it like I wanted you to be able to do, so you're going to have to just write it down. The first one is, what is one practical way I can use my life to let God's activity influence my family or my friends? Okay, that's the first question. Nothing too complicated, but just looking for something that you can maybe key in on and use as a point of saying, like, look, this is something that I think is valuable that I can use as an example of how God has been working in my life, and then share it with others. If we don't have a way of applying some of this stuff, it doesn't really help us. So we're just trying to find that thing, right, that we can say, this is something I can latch onto, and this is something that I can use to apply it, right? The second one is sometimes when I was younger, I used to question this one all the time. Now that I'm older and I've lived a long time and I'm super old and sore and falling apart, it's easier. But when I was younger, I always had this question too. And the question was, do you ever wonder if you have a testimony worth telling? If you feel like there's not a lot to talk about or there's not a lot to tell. And I think it's relative to what you think, right? I think if looking back at my life and going back through it, I think when I was younger, I thought maybe I don't have a whole lot of a testimony to go through. But I think also, though, looking back at it, thinking I did have a testimony, I just didn't think it was important, but it was. And the things I was going through, whatever, as a teenager or just out of high school or whatever, they could have been, and they probably would have been very valuable to share and be, open with people about them. But I didn't think it was worth talking about. So I think it's important to kind of think more deeper than just what it means to you, because what it means to you really doesn't mean a whole lot, right? Like, it could mean something completely different to somebody else. So your testimony, I think, don't underestimate your testimony even at a young age. But that's the second question. So think about that for yourself, if you've ever felt that way. And then the third question is, have you ever had someone influence you with a story of God's work in their lives? So have you been on the receiving end, on the recipient end of it? And what was it? And how did that work out? And what happened? And how did it come to be? These are all things to kind of look at and talk about, and then see if is there a comparison? Is there a way for you to emulate that, or to see that opportunity and say, oh, well, this is how that worked in this scenario, and maybe it's here, or here's the courage that person had to muster up to have that conversation with me, and that I can do the same, like whatever it is. But have you ever had someone else share with you how God's been working in their lives, and then that influence you on how you maybe do things? So with that, I'll let you guys go into your groups and have your little cool discussions. Again, just as a side note, if we talked last week, I know a lot of people weren't on because they are. I won't say it. I'm not gonna say it. But anyway, a lot of people weren't on. Sorry, happy birthday, Lizzie. So the question last week was, if you guys could keep something that's been going on with youth ministry in the last while, what would that thing be? Or things be? It can be more than one, obviously. And then if there's things you want to change or do differently or adjust, what are those things? And then let me know what those things are. Let your leaders know what those things are so they can get back to me, so that we can all discuss what things are feasible, what things can we do. Because youth group is as good as you guys want it to be. It's going to be as fun as you guys want it to be. as leaders, we're here to just kind of facilitate and help out. But you guys bring the fun, you guys bring the joy, and ultimately, I'm not a teenager anymore or close to it. Twice over, I kind of probably could have got to your age. So what we need is your guys' ideas and thoughts. Cool. So have your conversation, discuss it, and then we will meet again next week, I think. Oh yeah, we will. Cool. Bye.